We have some big news coming in. Delhi court has granted bail to Satyendra Jain in the PMLA case. The court says Jain has suffered long enough, a long incarceration, and now he should be granted bail. 18 months Satyendra Jain was in prison. The court refers to Supreme Court judgment in Manish Sisodia's case about the right to speedy trial. Constitution twin conditions must have mitigating effects in case of stringent laws also. In fact, these are words of the court. I'm going to ask Nalini, our correspondent tracking the courts for us, to give us a little more clarity. Nalini, Satyendra Jain finally gets bail by a Delhi court who sets example of Manish Sisodia on how he got bail, batting for speedy trial even with regards to Satyendra Jain's case.
Well, yes, Nabila, and even though these two cases, the one against Manish Sisodia and the one against Satyendra Jain, are not related, but despite that, what the court has said is that considering the fact that the trial is not even underway, let alone the trial be completed, and the fact that Satyendra Jain has already suffered a long incarceration of about 18 months, it is important that he be granted bail and he be released because the trial has nowhere to be completed. The court has also gone ahead and said that the twin conditions under the PMLA, which specifically make it more difficult for somebody who's accused under the PMLA to get bail, should be applied keeping in mind the facts of the case, and they should also be applied keeping in mind liberty of an individual. Considering that this is a issue regarding liberty, it is important that Satyendra Jain be released forthwith, and which is why he has now been granted bail in the money laundering case that was going on against him. Remember, one important clarification: he was not arrested in the excise policy case, so this is different from the case that Manish Sisodia was arrested under. But at the same time, the court has relied on the judgment given by the Supreme Court in the Manish Sisodia case because that had dealt in extensively with aspects of liberty as well as granting bail under the statute PMLA, which is of late considered to be a very draconian statute under which it becomes very difficult for an accused to get bail. So big relief coming in for Satyendra Jain and all the Aam Aadmi Party leaders, because one after the other you can see that several of the Aam Aadmi Party leaders have eventually found their way out of jail, and he can officially now come out. Of course, there are conditions imposed on him that he cannot interact with the witnesses, he will have to surrender his passport, he cannot influence the investigation of the trial and the case in any way. But at the same time, it is going to be a big relief for him that he's finally going to be able to step out of jail after a long incarceration.
Well, we hear that the Delhi court extensively heard arguments on behalf of Satyendra Jain's counsel where they pushed for his bail, claiming that he's not a flight risk, that he's no danger to the people, he cannot influence witnesses. Extensive arguments were heard, and on 5th of October, the judgment was reserved to today. And today it appears that there's some relief coming his way. Would you take us through a little on the arguments that were presented in court?
Well, Nabila, the Enforcement Directorate had strongly opposed the grant of bail to Satyendra Jain, and initially they had stated that it was because the investigation was still underway and there was a likelihood that Satyendra Jain, if allowed out, will influence the witnesses or try to tamper with the evidence in some way, and on that basis they had opposed the bail that was asked for by Satyendra Jain. But despite that, the court has relied more heavily on the fact that the trial in the case is still not underway, despite the fact that Satyendra Jain has been behind bars for 18 days, which was the main argument that was even placed by his counsel when they made this bail application before the court, speaking about how the trial is still not started in the entire case, which seems to have played a major role in not only Satyendra Jain's case, but even earlier in the cases of whether it be Sanjay Singh, whether it be Manish Sisodia, whether it be Arvind Kejriwal. We've all seen that the inability of the Enforcement Directorate to start the trial in the case, let alone finish the trial in a speedy manner, is something that has resulted in all of the accused that they had earlier arrested in being granted bail eventually. And though it's taken a long time, the court has realized that the liberty of an individual also needs to be given importance, because it is a right under the Constitution that cannot be diluted in any manner. And keeping in mind that the investigation is still underway and the trial is still not it's not started, it is important that his liberty not be compromised anymore, because he is essentially so far not even an under trial prisoner. He is only an accused who has been behind the bars for the past 18 months.
Well, we hear that Satyendra Jain was the case that that was registered, in fact, in 2017. Finally, 5 years later, the ED had filed a prosecution complaint, which was in 2022. So we're looking at the ordeal that Satyendra Jain faced. Of course, he still continues to face the investigation and probe, but it's been on since 2017 till today. Well over 8 years that he's been facing this case, which with regards to money laundering that claims that the proceeds of the crime of 1.27 crores he swindled. That's the allegation against him. Now, would you be able to break it down if you have an idea on the case that Satyendra Jain is facing, the money laundering case that he is now facing since 2017, Nalini?
Well, yes, Nabila, although the case has been going on since 2017, but Satyendra Jain was arrested only in May of 2022 when he was linked, when it was alleged that there were 4 companies that were linked to him which were involved in money laundering, and on those money laundering charges he was arrested by the Enforcement Directorate. At the same time, when this bail application was filed before the court, the Enforcement Directorate has also opposed his bail application, stating that there is a very strong likelihood that he might in fact influence the witnesses in this case. But none of those arguments by the Enforcement Directorate seem to have held any water before the court, because the court has categorically said today that it is crucial to uphold the liberty of an individual in certain cases, and keeping in mind that the trial has not begun, it is essential that he is let out of jail. At the same time, they've also, of course, imposed several conditions on him, which are standard when anybody is granted bail in such cases. So those conditions have been imposed on him, but it is going to be a big relief for him, considering the fact that he has been battling this case for the past several years. After his arrest in May 2022, he has been constantly behind the bars, except for a few times when he's been granted interim bail, either for medical purposes or due to some health-related issues. So those are the only times when he's come out. But despite that, he has been behind the bars. In fact, we've also seen his health deteriorating. The amount of weight that Satyendra Jain has lost during the time when he's been behind bars has raised some severe health-related concerns regarding his health. But it remains to be seen exactly how Aam Aadmi Party now takes this development. Of course, it's going to be a big relief and a big win for him. But at the same time, the Enforcement Directorate is now also going to be racing against him to ensure that not only do they start the trial in this case, but they make sure that it reaches its conclusion as soon as possible.
Stay with us, Nalini. I'm also going to bring in here Munish Pandey, who tracks the agencies for us. Munish, over to you on the case that Satyendra Jain was in prison for nearly 18 months. He finally is granted bail by the Delhi court. Would you break it down for us on the PMLA case that he's facing since 2017? 7 years on, the investigation is not yet complete, but the court now relieving him, claiming he's not a flight risk or is incapable of influencing witnesses in the case. But break it down for us, the case that he faces even till today.
Well, Nabila, the Central Bureau of Investigation had filed an FIR against Satyendra Jain and other accused in a corruption case, after which the Enforcement Directorate took over the investigation from the Central Bureau of Investigation, and they started investigation under Prevention of Money Laundering Act. As far as allegations against Satyendra Jain are concerned, they are very specific to money laundering. According to Enforcement Directorate, they have evidence that Satyendra Jain was involved in money laundering process, and that is why on 30th May 2022, he was arrested late evening by the Enforcement Directorate in this case. What ED claims that they had solid evidence against Satyendra Jain, and that is why he was in jail from last 18 months. Also, ED says that most of the times his bail was rejected by the lower court and even by the higher courts, because there was a strong evidence of money laundering by Satyendra Jain of almost more than 1 crore rupees. But now ED says that they will be monitoring this development. The court has indeed granted bail to Satyendra Jain, but they will try to initiate a trial in this case as soon as possible, because ED claims that they are yet to record few statements in the case, and once the statements are recorded, they will go for trial in this case. Nabila.
So what we know here, Munish, is that the CBI was interrogating Satyendra Jain in the same case, and so was the ED. While the CBI said that the proceeds of the crime involving Satyendra Jain amounts to 1.27 crores, we hear ED claims it's 4.68 crores. So far, the ED hasn't really filed a charge sheet. What do you believe is the reason for the delay there?
Well, Nabila, the CBI case was regarding the corruption in this case, and when initial FIR was filed based on the information, then the CBI believed that this can be a corruption case of more than 1.27 crore rupees. But when ED started investigation in this case, they found that there were multiple companies through which this amount was routed. There were land deals also which were under scrutiny of the Enforcement Directorate, and the total amount, according to Enforcement Directorate, was more than 4 crore rupees. Satyendra Jain was interrogated multiple times by the Enforcement Directorate, and based on the evidence collected by the ED, he was arrested on 30th May 2022. Now, as far as charge sheets are concerned, several charge sheets, including supplementary charge sheet, have been filed by the Enforcement Directorate in this case. But now the ED wants to initiate trial in this case because, ED also knows that you can't keep a person behind the jail for more than 1 year or more than 1.5 years. In this case, Satyendra Jain was in jail for more than 18 months. As of now, ED believes that it's a win-win situation for them. But finally, they need the final outcome in this case, and that can happen only when the trial is, initiated in this case. And that is why, because they have filed charge sheets in this case, they will be pursuing the case for the next process, which is going to be the trial in this case. Nabila.
Munish, please do stay with me. I'm going to also bring in Nalini here. Nalini, has there been any opposition from the Enforcement Directorate on the release of Satyendra Jain on bail, or do you believe that they will be going forward?
Well, Nabila, when the bail application was filed before the trial court, during the arguments, of course, the Enforcement Directorate had opposed bail being granted to Satyendra Jain. But now that the court order has come, what remains to be seen is as to whether or not the Enforcement Directorate is going to go ahead and challenge this order before a higher court, or whether they are going to comply with it and allow Satyendra Jain to actually step out behind the bars.
Okay. I request you to stay with us, Nalini. I'm going to quickly bring in Satyendra Jain's lawyer, who's spoken to the media right after the bail verdict.
आज ट्रायल कोर्ट ने हमें सत्येंद्र जैन को रेगुलर बेल दे दी है. ट्रायल कोर्ट ने कहा है that there are two constitutional twin conditions, which is Article 21, which is primary and which would obviously trump the twin conditions of PMLA. Therefore, since there was a long incarceration and the trial has not even begun, therefore the trial court has said that Mr. Satyendra Jain is entitled to bail, and he's been granted bail for a surety amount of rupees 50,000.
So any specific conditions that have been set by the court?
I am still to see the order, but I don't think there is any special condition which has been imposed on him. These are the normal conditions which are imposed to any person who is granted bail.
So can we expect Mr. Jain to walk out of jail today?
He would definitely walk out from the jail today itself, because the order is getting ready. We have given the surety bonds, so he will come out.
Thank you.
All right, that's the counsel of Satyendra Jain. Well, finally, after 18 months, nearly 2 years, Satyendra Jain will be stepping out of prison. He was taken into custody by the ED in a money laundering case, and he seems to now get bail, relief after nearly 2 years. Thank you very much, Nalini and Munish, for joining us with those details.